Hello everyone, this is Daring to Think and this video is about my favorite books of 2025. Yes, I'm recording it only now. I know I'm a bit late for this video, but I wanted to wait until I was certain of my top reads for this year. Additionally, these are my top picks in English. Prior to 2025, I hadn't actually read in English, so these books hold a very special place in my journey. Having said that, let's get started. The first book is Salman's Rushdi Victory City. I read it in February, so it's been a long time. Honestly, I think I was probably a little biased when I read this, since Rushdi was my favorite author at the time. Even so, I'm still drawn to his works for enchanting plots, absolutely beautiful prose, and satirical edge. There is such an eloquence to his writings. He weaves these long, winding sentences that remain compelling from start to finish. Despite the magical realism, there is a profound historical weight to his stories. In fact, he holds a degree in history from Cambridge University. When I read him, I feel genuinely transported to another dimension of our world, with talking animals, wizards, riots, and kings. All of his characters are unique in a peculiar way. One thing's for sure, you're never going to find a dull or uninspiring hero in his stories. Another attribute of his writing is this perpetual sense of summer. Salman Rushdie was born in India, although he lives in New York now. There is a lot to be said about his incredible biography, but I'll save that for another time, so we can stay focused on the books. If you're interested in a deeper dive into Salman Rushdie in his books, let me know in the comments and I'll create a follow-up video dedicated solely to him. Anyway, I was talking about that endless sense of summer. The Victory City is set in the tropics, so the air is thick with vibrant spices, rich scents, people dressed in every color, and obviously tropical animals. I think it won't be an outright lie to say that this author doesn't portray winter in his stories. I want to convey this summer vibe, so I'll read to you a couple of lines. Quote, "The encampment in the first blazed with activity, as the princesses released their rage into construction projects. Their residence grew larger with the passage of time, with multiple rooms connected by a labyrinth of corridors. And now there was a thick, soft carpet of bronze on the floors, and there were 3 stumps carved into comfortable seats by the skill of their blades, and whittled wooded blocks for pillows, curved into the shapes of their necks." Unquote. Salman Rushdie is brilliant at anchoring reality with a touch of the surreal. But we can't talk about his work without mentioning the plot. Our protagonist is Pampa Campana, and we get to watch her transformation from a 9-year-old girl into a semi-divine figure over 2.5 centuries. She is the falcon of the city, empowered by a goddess to dismantle patriarchal norms and give women true agency in a world that tries to hold them back. It sounds as an interesting premise, but the book is far more multifaceted than you can imagine. For example, it is set in the 14th century in the south of what we now call India and Hindustan. The Victory City literally grows out of the ground, from 2 seeds sown by 2 brothers, Hukka and Bukka, who eventually become the empire's first rulers. By the way, these names are actually taken from 14th century history, which makes the world feel even more alive. To circle back, Pampa Campana is a constant fixture at court, appearing at various times as a minister, a regent, a queen, a mother, a poet, and so on and so forth. We uncover the sweeping saga of her life through a narrator who discovers her epic poem written in Sanskrit, which reveals her struggle to realize the goddess' mission. Don't worry, this is not a spoiler as it is laid out in the very first chapter. Saying beforehand, there won't be any major spoilers in this video, because I know how frustrating spoilers can be. As I mentioned, we've given translated fragments of the poem throughout the novel. It has quite a quick pace, so you won't be bored as you discover the Victory City. Well, I've mostly talked about the plot so far, but the themes in this book are actually amazing too. For instance, Rushdi suggests that true love is actually self-love. The idea that you have to be united with yourself before you can truly love someone else. It goes so much deeper than that. The book discovers is the oppression of the many by the few, the true value of independent thought, and the sheer power of fiction. It even looks at how foreigners tell their stories about the world, and how, in the end, people's lives only truly survive when they're captured in a story. There is so much more to say about this book, and I hope I've intrigued you enough to seek out a copy for yourself. Salman Rushdie crafts riveting characters and fantastic yet grounded worlds. My next pick is No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. Just to be clear, I'm not listing these books from worst to best, these are just my favorites in no particular order. Okay, born in 1909, Osamu Dazai came of age in the 1930s. As we know, it was far from an easy era, which explains his raw and gritty writing style. World War II was looming and Japan was headed toward defeat. You get the idea. I highly recommend diving into Dazai's biography, as his life had a profound impact on this book specifically. But I cannot definitively say if this applies to his other works, as my exposure to his literary catalog is limited to this masterpiece. The truth is, I suspect Dazai projected himself onto the character in this narrative because it possesses an undeniably autobiographical quality. Now I'll briefly touch on the plot to illustrate what kind of journey this book takes you on. The title actually describes the main protagonist, Obayosa, quite accurately. He's isolated from broader society, although he strives to adapt to his life's circumstances and to blend in with the crowd. But his attempts always come to nothing. He's regarded by his peers as a clown, but this is a calculated facade used to mask his inability to connect with the world. On the whole, Obayosa is unable to understand other human beings, and his incapability drives the plot. In other words, the reader undergoes a harrowing journey through the eyes of a young man marginalized by society. I know it may sound a bit bleak, and frankly, it is. This is certainly not a book for leisurely relaxation. If you are currently emotionally vulnerable, I would advise caution, as its heavy themes can be quite distressing. But don't get too discouraged. I haven't included any mediocre or unworthy reads in this list. While turning the pages, we inevitably find ourselves questioning society and its rules, as the character isn't convinced any of them make sense. Obayosa wonders whether happy moments in human lives are sincere, or everyone is merely pretending, which is an act of deception. We should also clearly define what exactly we imply when we are talking about society. Is it a single individual deciding how society will look, or a collective group driven by shared beliefs? Even though Yob is radically reclusive, he has to interact with other people. It's not hard to see, however, that they constantly reject him. The reality is, these are distinct individuals. Therefore, each person is presented with a choice: to accept the other or to exclude him altogether. And they believe that their actions align with what society expects. I've tried to explain Yosa's unyielding suspicion of everyone as best I possibly could. The next theme that piqued my interest is the concept of punishment and reward. Yosa struggles to find the antonym of crime. For example, the antonym of love is hate, but with crime it gets much more complicated. Perhaps Yosa might start from scratch, if only he could find the true opposite of crime. Moving on, the book is very short, so I won't say anything else to avoid spoilers. In fact, it's under 200 pages, so you can easily finish it within a day. The language is also straightforward as we see the events unfolding from Obayosa's point of view. I think few people would find much in common with the protagonist or feel a deep sense of empathy toward him. However, this work forces you to reflect at length. I myself spent hours mulling over this book once I had read it. If you're still not convinced to give it a try, I will tell you that No Longer Human is among the best-selling books in Japan, and Osamu Dazai is one of Japan's most important writers. Let's now turn to Lucy Maud Montgomery's book called Anne of Green Gables and its sequel Anne of Avonley. I really think we should see these two books as a single unit for two reasons. First, it's one big story and it feels incomplete if you look at the parts individually. Secondly, Montgomery wrote an entire series centered on Anne Shirley, including 8 books. In these two novels, we see Anne grow up, bridging the gap between her spirited childhood and her journey into maturity. By the way, Anne is the main protagonist, so naturally the plot revolves around her. Let me walk you through the storyline in more detail. The story opens with Anne as a young orphan, and I'd like to read the author's description to you as nothing I say could really do it justice. A child of about 11 garbed in a very short, very tight, very ugly dress of yellowish-grey wincey. She wore a faded brown sailor hat, and beneath the hat, extending down her back, were 2 braids of very thick, decidedly red hair. Her face was small, white, and thin, also much freckled. Her mouth was large, and so were her eyes, which looked like green in some lights, and mood and grey in others. So far, the ordinary observer, an extraordinary observer might have seen, that the chin was very pointed and pronounced, that the big eyes were full of spirit and vivacity, that the mouth was sweet-lipped and expressive, that the forehead was broad and full. She is energetic and hopelessly romantic. People are drawn to her kind nature and quick wit. Because red hair wasn't nearly as common at the time, Anne found herself being teased by some of the locals over her appearance. Nevertheless, she is an internal optimist who cherishes joy in the smallest things, even if her constant daydreaming occasionally creates a barrier between her and the people around. One of her most admirable qualities is her unyielding determination. What I mean is that she never gives up. Of course, she is no automaton and she has her moments of vulnerability, but she is incredibly resilient, quickly regaining her footing to once again embrace the breathtaking beauty of life. Take, for example, her own words. All sorts of mornings are interesting, don't you think? You don't know what's going to happen through the day, and there is so much scope for imagination. As you can see, the child welcomes every morning despite being an orphan. She could have withdrawn from the world and become a somber, tearful child, yet she chooses to find the extraordinary in everyday life, unlike those around her who, despite their more fortunate circumstances, often fail to see the beauty she does. Okay, having explored Anne's personality, let's shift our focus to the broader plot. Well, we watch how Anne matures into a woman and the various hardships and the joys she encounters along the way. In fact, there aren't any dramatic upheavals like in Victory City or the melancholic tone of No Longer Human. On the contrary, the narrative is radiant and full of light. I can't describe it differently, it's just so warm and incredibly inspiring. While Anne is certainly fallible, she treats every mistake as an opportunity for growth, aided by the guidance of the people around her. We can learn a great deal from Anne and the matters in her life. Let me share a few ideas with you that I find absolutely fascinating. Everybody should have a purpose in life and pursue it faithfully. Only, he says, we must first make sure that it is a worthy purpose. What I want to get out of my college course is some knowledge of the best way of living life and doing the most and best with it. I want to learn to understand and help other people and myself. From what I've read, I think it's clear that the book is intended for the younger generation, which is why I'm so enthusiastic, as I belong to that very audience myself. At the same time, adults can derive profound meaning and hope from the story as well. The book encourages you to appreciate each day, even those that seem entirely ordinary. There is a chapter called Just a Happy Day. It's a beautiful reminder, as it's very easy to forget that every day is precious. After all, a lifetime is simply comprised of small moments that turn into days and eventually into years. And the author underscores this truth through the exquisite prose. In essence, and inspires us to press on and stay undaunted. Every day has its own charm, regardless of the obstacles we have to navigate. Without giving too much away, and finds out that love is actually more grounded, even though we are often told it's a fairy tale. Instead, it can come quietly, unexpectedly, and without the dramatic bursts we see in the movies. At the end of the day, our mistakes only make us stronger, provided we are willing to learn from them. Now, a little bit about the author. Lucy Maud Montgomery was born in New London in the 1870s. After losing her mother at a young age, her father placed her in the care of her maternal grandparents. She was an imaginative child who started writing poetry when she was just 9. Montgomery actually taught for a while too. Her first attempt to publish Anne of Green Gables was rejected, but she eventually succeeded, which marked the beginning of her career as a novelist. I should also mention that the book has many adaptations, and it's entirely your choice which one to pick. As for me, I watched Anne with an E series, which takes a more modern approach to this novel. It definitely left a good impression, but nothing beats the original book. If you can read the novel first, you'll appreciate the adaptations so much more. If you are wondering why I always talk about writer's biography, it's because I believe we can't truly grasp a novel without understanding the context it was written in. Of course, if the themes are crystal clear or if the story just isn't grabbing you, it's perfectly fine to skip biography altogether. However, if the text feels ambiguous or overly complex, the writer's background becomes the ultimate key to unlocking the story. Sometimes it's a lack of craft on the writer's part, or perhaps there is a deeper layer of meaning that's easy to overlook. Next on my list is a book I'd been meaning to read for years. I first spotted this on BookTube and it's been on my mind ever since. Needless to say, I was so excited to finally get my hands on it. Since I'd been looking for this story for a long time, I had high expectations and fortunately, The Alchemist lived up to them. Not only did it live up to the hype, but it ended up being one of my top books of the year and that's saying something. Plus, this is the 25th anniversary edition, so it includes an author's foreword that only intrigued me further. Then there are these little black and white drawings that make you feel like you're reading a fairy tale. All in all, this edition is beautifully crafted, but let's shift our focus to the content itself. You could describe it as an adventure story as it follows a protagonist on a quest for treasure in Egypt, while navigating both personal and external challenges. Although the book is called The Alchemist, our main character is actually just a young shepherd boy named Santiago. The author doesn't specify his exact age, but I'd place him somewhere in his early 20s. So he embarks on this journey to find the treasure, and we, as readers, follow him every step of the way. I won't reveal why it's titled The Alchemist to avoid spoilers, I'll let you discover that for yourself. Speaking of the novel's message, there's a recurring theme of the personal legend, which represents one's most cherished dream. For example, say someone is a baker, but their heart is really in opening a tea shop. In this case, their personal legend is to transition from baking to creating the tea shop they've always wanted. Unfortunately, most people never pursue their personal legends, often held back by fear or the comfort of a predictable life. If the baker is accustomed to his daily routine, he might be reluctant to face the inconvenience of changing his profession. He allows each day to look just like the last, even though deep down he longs to become a tea expert. That's the reality of so many of us, But the narrator warns that this is precisely what stands in the way of achieving our personal legends. The writer draws a parallel between the heart and rational thought, defining the heart as our innate desire to achieve our dreams. People are afraid to listen to their hearts. That is to say, they are afraid of the weight of fulfilling their dreams. But as the author points out, you can never truly escape your heart, so you might as well embrace what it's trying to tell you. Tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself. The world is not a threatening place, only if you don't see it that way. And for the thousandth time, there's plenty of good in every day, as long as you know it to be true. Then, when we finally decide to follow our personal legend, we become better individuals, and by doing so, we change our environment for the good too. It's like when one runner pushes to reach the finish line first and speeds up, the competitors inevitably pick up the pace as well. There's one important thing to consider though. Since we've chosen to follow our personal legends, we're invested in our own success, and that's exactly what all other dream chasers do. Consequently, we should respect people's pursuit of their dreams, provided those dreams are worthy. We should also honor their methods, even when they don't align with our own. It might seem like I'm getting off track, but I'm just analyzing the content without any obvious spoilers. To dive into more detail, I really like the conversation between the boy and the king of Salem. Paulo Coelho uses the term the boy most of the time, so I'll stick with it as well. Returning back to the point, the king explains to the boy about what a personal legend actually is. He defines it as something you've always wanted to achieve since you were young, before people become pessimistic or start choosing a career based on prestige rather than their dreams. Eventually, they give up on their personal legends and settle for something less desirable. It's not completely unsatisfactory, but it's not their dream either. The king reminds the poet that our true obligation in life is to fulfill our personal legend. I think it means everyone should be in their right place, eager to work and feeling a sense of purpose in their daily lives. I'd say Paulo Coelho is an anti-fatalist. He believes we can achieve our dreams as long as we remain consistent in our actions. The quote I'm about to read you illustrates this belief perfectly. It's this, that at a certain point in our lives, we lose control of what's happening to us, and our lives become controlled by fate. That's the world's greatest lie. Once you finish the novel, it's up to you to decide whether you agree with him or not. I've just laid out a few compelling points for you to think about. In the case of this book, I won't spend much time on the author's biography, because the foreword already covers the essential background info. I'll just mention that Paulo Coelho is from Brazil, and surprisingly, The Alchemist didn't sell at all when it was first published. But Paulo Coelho didn't back down. He approached countless publishers before someone finally agreed to take a chance on his story. Today, The Alchemist stands as the most translated book by any living author and is regarded as one of the top 10 books of the 20th century. I think that fact alone speaks volumes about the power of this novel. I've already told you that I haven't ranked these books because they're all equally valuable to me, but I have to admit, the last are the ones I love most. Well, to be honest, the very last book is my absolute favorite, and the one I'm holding right now is right behind it. Okay, this is Massimo Pigliucci's How to Be a Stoic, and it is the first nonfiction book that earned a spot in my 2025 favorites. I'm sorry if I pronounced his name incorrectly. It's not just nonfiction, it's a philosophical exploration of Stoicism, which is likely obvious from the title. I believe this is the ideal guidebook for anyone curious about Stoic philosophy, particularly for beginners who are just starting their journey into philosophical literature. Actually, I was in the same boat when I first picked up this book. My interest in philosophy had been growing for a while, yet I found myself stuck at the starting line. To tell the truth, I was intimidated by primary philosophical text, unsure if I could make sense of it at all. As a result, How to Be a Stoic provided the solid base I needed to feel confident in my journey through philosophy. Let's take a look at how it achieves it. Typically, I like to start by diving into the core narrative before exploring the mind behind the work. However, this time, I'd like to break my usual routine and begin with the author's background. Well, Massimo Pigliucci is the professor of philosophy at the City College of New York. And I was actually surprised to learn that beyond philosophy, he holds PhDs in genetics and evolutionary biology, which is why he's published books in both fields. He simplifies complex philosophical concepts by using relatable examples from his own life and the lives of others, making ideas that might have initially seemed vague feel incredibly tangible. For example, as we dive into the book, we discover that Massimo Pigliucci was actually raised in Rome. His bibliography features many titles on Stoic philosophy, but our focus today will be on this specific volume. I absolutely love the structure of this book, as it's incredibly logical, making it easy to follow exactly where each concept fits. The author kicks things off by briefly outlining the core Stoic principles and exploring a bit of its history. The book is built upon the teachings of Epictetus, weaving in his actual quotes. Every chapter opens with a thought-provoking quote Epictetus, and you'll often find additional excerpts woven into the middle of the text. This book is divided into 3 parts with 4 chapters in each section. The first part is called The Discipline of Desire, which teaches us how to regulate our thoughts and ensures we're heading in a constructive direction. For the sake of simplicity, I'd like to examine the first part to start with. The author clarifies right away that philosophy is not just a therapy, it's a lifelong practice that provides you a holistic understanding of what life is truly about. He also states that he's become a Stoic and provides several compelling reasons for his decision. These include his exposure to philosophy in high school, his transition to atheism, and the enduring practicality of a system that guides you throughout your life. Having explained that, he introduces the 4 cardinal virtues. It's perfectly fine if these are new to you, but this is something you'll definitely want to know. What is the goal of virtue, after all, except a life that flows smoothly? Then we have the dichotomy of control. This principle teaches that we shouldn't let ourselves be troubled by anything outside our power, especially things that have already happened in the past. Because the past is beyond our control, we simply cannot change it. The only situations we can do something about are those happening here and now. In fact, I've read this book twice, so now I can almost recite my favorite passages by heart. Anyway, based on the dichotomy of control, regret is a waste of our emotional energy. Because changing the past, again, is outside of our control. On top of that, we can't change other people's emotions or behaviors, let alone the outcomes of their behaviors. The implications of this are clear. After you've put in the effort, simply embrace the result, as it's no longer in your hands. The final point worth noting in this section is the concept of nature. You may have heard the phrase, live according to nature. Now, this doesn't mean we should abandon modern comforts and go live in the wild. No, this principle suggests that since humans are inherently rational and social beings, we should use our own reason to cultivate the best possible society. This perspective extends beyond any individual group or national boundary. In fact, some Stoics are cosmopolitists. They identify themselves as citizens of the universe. Thus, the goal is to build the best possible society on Earth. Now, let's move on to the second part. I should mention that the author doesn't focus exclusively on Stoicism. He incorporates different teachings and religions to provide a much broader perspective. You'll find references to Taoism, Christianity, Buddhism, Confucianism, rationalism, Aristotelianism, skepticism, and so on and so forth. Instead of a narrow viewpoint, you get to explore a wide range of ideas, which I believe is one of the book's greatest strengths. On a different note, I am under the impression that the core message of Part 2 centers on our personal abilities. We should focus on what's within our control rather than dwell on what isn't. To achieve this, we must put Stoic techniques into action, meaning we need consistent practice to truly embody these principles. As the saying goes, practice makes perfect. Massimo Pigliucci introduces us to Larry Becker, a retired philosophy professor who continues his scholarly work, despite living with a disability. He's able to do this because he has learned to treat his disability as a dispreferred indifferent, choosing instead to focus on his remaining abilities. Finally, once we take the wheel of our own lives, it's time to craft a life plan that is both achievable and adaptable. I like this idea. We've now reached at the final part of our discussion. To begin, I simply couldn't pass up the opportunity to share this quote. Stay where you are and depart not without reason. Death is nothing to fear, okay? We came from cosmic dust and we will eventually return to it. A powerful reminder of how grateful we should be for this brief window of life. Fear or regret will only serve to spoil the time we have. The writer contends, however, that euthanasia is absolutely morally acceptable under certain conditions and shares an example of when it was actually carried out. While such legislation must be meticulously crafted, it's really a shame that it remains prohibited in most countries. Now I'd like to spend a moment touching on the ancient Greek concept of amasia. It suggests that we should view those who do wrong as being mistaken. The goal then is to help them find the right path. In a modern context, this concept is reflected in the reformation of criminals, which focuses on rehabilitative strategies such as education, psychological counseling, etc. to foster reintegration. This strikes me as the best course of action when managing outlaws despite the higher costs involved. Another key point is that anger is fundamentally irrational, which is why it helps to pause and catch your breath for a second before responding. Honestly, I've never come across anyone capable of making rational choices in the heat of the moment. Next, I have to mention the 4 Stoic virtues, which are wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. I won't go into too much detail as I've spent quite a bit of time on this book already, so if you're interested, grab a copy for yourself and enjoy this amazing read. And just like that, we've arrived at the final part of this book, as a conclusion. In the appendix, the author explores the various schools of Hellenistic philosophy, and more importantly, he outlines 12 practical spiritual exercises. To really guided philosophy calls for a great deal of practice. In fact, even Massimo Pigliucci mentions that he regularly practices to grow as a Stoic. What's most valuable about this chapter is that the author doesn't just give you abstract theories, he demonstrates exactly how these exercises improve people's daily lives. If you're still hesitating to pick this up because of the technical language, don't worry. The notes at the end break down the difficult parts for you. I apologize if I've gone on a bit of a tangent, I just can't help myself when it comes to Stoicism. Let's jump straight into it. Rounding out my list is the Discourses of Epictetus in the translation by George Long. You can see how I moved from how to be a Stoic to the actual work of Stoicism. Setting aside introductory guides, it was my second dive into a primary source. I was well prepared for the challenge, and now it's my favorite book. The only thing that slightly dampened the experience was the 19th century translation. I'm looking for a more modern version, as English has naturally moved on since the 19th century. Nevertheless, I don't have the slightest regret about choosing this edition. George Long's commentary on each chapter, where he references other famous philosophers, is incredibly insightful. On top of that, the book features some beautiful pictures and ends with Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, who was another key Stoic. But enough about the edition itself, let's explore what's actually inside. I'm not even sure where to start. I thought I'd flip through my book stickers to share the ideas that sparked my interest. First, Epictetus views humans as animals capable of reason, which makes sense considering our distant ancestors were primates. Next, he addresses those who do wrong out of ignorance, the concept of amasia we covered earlier. By the way, these are Epictetus' authentic spoken words. He never actually wrote a book. Instead, his disciple Arian transcribed their conversations. We're incredibly lucky he did, because without his records, we wouldn't be able to study Epictetus' philosophy today. The next thing I noticed was how familiar many of these passages felt. It turns out I'd already encountered them in How to Be a Stoic. It was honestly so exciting to come across paragraphs and ideas I already knew. It felt like a much deeper dive into Stoic thought. If Massimo Pigliucci's work was like wading into the shallows, reading Epictetus was akin to plunging meters down into the very heart of the ocean. You can see why reading them in this order works so well, right? Anyway, let's return to the core ideas within the book. Our opinions and judgments play a massive role in shaping who we are. But at the same time, those very opinions can become our biggest restraints. They convince that we are worse off than others, that we are constantly lacking or never have enough. The truth is, it is all relative. Whether we fall short of our goals despite our best efforts, or face ourselves dealing with someone's misconduct, we can take comfort in the fact that we acted with integrity. We can't undo the past, and we certainly can't change how other people think and feel. Personally, I find this to be a very comforting maxim. Give your all to the task, but stay untroubled if the variables outside your control go awry. With that in mind, Epictetus advises us to be especially careful regarding our own volition, which is just another way of looking what's up to us versus what isn't. Moving on, I really love the idea that education is a primary tool for gaining freedom. The educated only are free. How is this? In this manner, is freedom anything else than the power of living as we choose? Nothing else. Tell me then, do you wish to live in error? We do not. No one then who lives in error is free. To put it simply, educated individuals see the fuller picture, which enables them to make more reasoned choices. Conversely, those without that broader insight tend to stumble more frequently, however much they try to be careful. The mistakes weren't deliberate, they happen spontaneously rather than by choice. The educated, however, have the power to choose whether they sidestep errors or consciously take risks. Therefore, a lack of education inherently restricts one's autonomy, leading to a more limited range of choices. While there are certainly plenty of exceptions, the core message remains clear. As I mentioned earlier when I was talking about how to be a Stoic, Epictetus highlights the importance of repeated practice. We learn, study, and practice. Otherwise, we merely echo the opinions of others without understanding the meaning behind them. By definition, opinion is not knowledge, yet many of us cling to the groundless views of the majority simply for the sake of belonging. There is an additional hazard to consider, the risk that our words may become disconnected from our actions and feelings. Epictetus places a profound emphasis on the danger of false opinions. He says, "It is of no great importance if you retain the story, but have formed no opinion of your own." I invite you to explore books that resonate with you and cultivate your own unique viewpoint. I'd like to hear your take. Feel free to leave a comment or share your insights wherever you post. I believe that by sharing the books we love, we can help one another uncover high-quality works we might have otherwise overlooked. And that's the main reason I'm filming this video. Back to Epictetus, it's interesting to see how he points us toward the actions of Socrates, clearly framing his behavior as an exemplary path for us to follow. We learn that Socrates never lost his cool during an argument and avoided insults entirely, focusing instead on resolving the quarrel. After receiving his death sentence, Socrates sent away the women and children so that he wouldn't have to witness their sorrow and would maintain his composure. But he found an unexpected mourner in the jailer, who wept openly. Socrates stayed calm, however, seeing that the man's behavior was just a reflection of his internal beliefs. He is to be pardoned then. The man had developed a grim outlook regarding Socrates' impending end. But as Epictetus often reminds us, move your attention to things governed by your will, which is just another way of saying focus on what's truly up to you. What's more, he's convinced we can find happiness in any situation, even the most dire. as long as we stop looking for the good in external things like fame, wealth, or health. Our only real power lies in the correct use of appearances, a term the Stoics used to describe all the information our senses take and every emotion triggered by the world around us. So, when we face an unpleasant situation, the Stoic approach isn't just to grin and bear it, but to meet the challenge with honor and a steady mind. To talk like a Stoic is easy, to live like one is difficult. But don't be mistaken, this book reaches beyond Stoic philosophy. While my copy was first published in 1904, the translation itself was completed by George Long in 1877. His chapter-by-chapter commentary is fascinating, as it offers a rare window into how people in the 19th century England viewed the world. When you think about it, it's hardly surprising that the language has shifted so much over the last 120 years. Since George Long was a devout Christian, he frequently draws parallels, quoting passages from the Bible. Back when Epictetus lived, formal religion as we know it today hadn't truly taken hold. Yet, the translator spots clear links between Stoicism and religious thought, largely because philosophy deeply shaped the spiritual traditions that followed. For example, George Long claims that the New Testament writers actually borrowed certain expressions from Stoic philosophers. Both Paul, one of the apostles, and Epictetus share the view that a divine spirit exists within a person. Said that Epictetus's concept of God differs significantly from Paul's. The Stoics believed in Zeus, who is more like nature or the universe as a whole. In addition, Epictetus is somewhat vague about his beliefs as he tends to switch between referring to God, Zeus, and the gods. Having said that, exploring how philosophy influenced early religion is interesting, but we should be clear the two are distinct. Moving on to the next theme, it is the idea that everything is in a state of flux. This means change is inevitable, but more importantly, it's beneficial because it paves the way for new creations. There are specific periods for things to occur, which are eventually replaced by others. It shows just how ephemeral everything truly is. It's easy to fall into a routine and assume it lasts forever, but embracing change is essential if we want to live happily. Epictetus used a perfect metaphor to capture how reality constantly changes. Life is a kind of warfare, and it is long and diversified. Keeping this in mind makes any hardship feel less overwhelming. After all, doesn't grief always stem from an unwelcome change? That's how we relieve our own suffering and extend the same comfort to someone else. Ultimately, we're at the mercy of how we choose to interpret our impressions. Finally, I want to emphasize the importance of making room for others. I believe we need to hone our skills in the exact areas where we want to achieve success. Now, Epictetus specifically talks about choosing the right opinions, but that's not quite my point here. It's admirable to strive to outdo others where your goals are, but at the same time, it's completely pointless to envy anyone who outperforms you elsewhere. At the end of the day, we just need to learn to yield sometimes. That's all there is to it. This was a pretty quick overview, but if you're curious to learn more about Epictetus's discourses, I've got a whole video dedicated to it right here. To wrap things up, let me leave you with this. What am I? Am I a poor body, a piece of property, a thing of which something is said? I am none of this. But what am I? I am a rational animal. What then is required of me? Reflect on your acts. Where have I omitted the things which conduce to happiness? What have I done which is either unfriendly or unsocial? What I have not done as to the things which I ought to have done? I really appreciate you being here and spending this time with me. I hope you found a few reads to add to your reading list, because if you did, then my mission is complete. Please share your favorite reads in the comments, as I'm also searching for books worth reading. Or if you've read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. In other words, any book talk is more than welcome in the comments. Have a good one and dare to think.